Hello, and welcome to the New York State Archives webinar module series on record scheduling, a family of short presentations providing overviews of topics related to retention and disposition of government records. This module's topic is using retention schedules describing state agency records. My name is Monica Hauck-Whealton, and I'll be your presenter. We're going to start today's session by talking about the different types of retention schedules used by state agencies. From there, we'll go on to finding the right record series that applies to your specific records. We'll also talk about the times when, even if a record is scheduled to be destroyed or transferred to the archives, you can't do so quite yet. And finally, we'll go on to what to do when you have questions or otherwise need assistance. There are two types of retention schedules used by state agencies. The first, called the General Retention and Disposition Schedule for New York State government records, is used by most agencies. And the second type, agency-specific schedules, are those schedules that cover your mission-specific records. The general schedule is prepared by the state archive staff with the input from agencies. These are the schedules that cover the functions that every organization needs to, operate correctly. These are your fiscal records, your personnel records, your administrative records. These are the folks that, even though they may not be doing work that contributes directly to your mission, you would not be able to fulfill your mission without doing this type of work and creating these types of records. Because these are fairly standard record types, most agencies can retain them for the same amount of time to meet the same legal requirements. That's why it's great that the archives created them, because we do the research, we talk to you, and we figure out what works in most circumstances. And that means that each agency doesn't need to independently do their research, do their evaluations. If your agency wants to adopt this general schedule and use these schedules, and most of you have already done that, you don't need to provide us with a list. Just let us know that, oh, we're going to be using items from the general schedule. We'll note that down, and then you will be able to abide by those schedules and dispose of records in accordance with them. Here's an example of a general schedule item. Any retention schedule item is essentially going to tell you what the records are, how long you need to hold on to them, why that retention period was decided upon, and what to do with them when they're no longer needed. Each schedule also has a 5-digit identification number. This one starts with a 9, which will uniquely identify the record. It's called a records disposition authorization number. And if you needed to cite a record series to say that, oh, this type of record, they're categorized as these, thus they're retained for this amount of time, citing that 5-digit number is all that you're going to be able to need to communicate that those records are kept for that amount of time. If the schedule belongs to the general schedule, the 5-digit number is going to start with a 9, like this one, 90300. Here are some examples from the general schedule. As I said, these are record types that most every agency is going to create. We all have policies and procedures. We all have payroll records and personnel records, and most of us have fleet vehicles that we use. And as you can see, each of these schedules has a 5-digit RDA number that starts with the number 9 because it's from the general schedule. Now, agency-specific schedules, they're the ones for the records that do apply to your mission. Because your agency staff are the subject matter experts on what you do, why these records are created, how they support your mission, and any legal or administrative requirements to keep them to support that mission, you're going to take the lead on this. Even though archive staff, may be drafting some or all of the language, or maybe doing legal research to support the reasoning behind it, we really depend on you to tell us why the records are important and how you use them. We're going to make sure that these schedules match your needs so that even if it's a record type that 10 agencies create, you may have special legal or administrative needs for them. And we will make sure that those are abided by. We will make sure that they're documented within the schedule so that your agency staff know how you need to treat the records so that you can do your jobs and meet any obligations placed upon you. No matter how the schedule is created, no matter whether agency staff draft the entire thing and we just polish it up at the archives, or if we provide more assistance, you cannot dispose of records until after that schedule has been approved by the archives. And here's an example of an agency-specific schedule. This form has changed multiple times over the years. So if you or your records management officer are pulling copies of the approved schedules, it might not look quite like this. But no matter what the schedule looks like, it's going to have the same information that we discussed for the general schedule, plus a few additional fields which, for the purposes of identifying which record series to use, aren't really that important. Those fields are going to be discussed in another session of this series where we talk about how to create retention schedules. If you want copies of the retention schedules, you can contact your agency records management officer, or you can contact the state archives, and we're happy to provide copies. We could also provide you with a copy of a spreadsheet listing all of your schedules. And just like with the general schedule, here are some examples of agency-specific schedules. The first two that you look at, it's pretty obvious who they belong to. State Highway History Manuals, that's Department of Transportation. The Shellfish Management Program, that's the Department of Environmental Conservation. The next two are for agencies that oversee functions that impact other entities. So for example, while every agency has payroll records, the Office of the State Comptroller oversees that function. So they have a special series for their records, and that requires a longer retention than those for agencies for their payroll records. Likewise, while we all have surplus property, like that printer where the toner just isn't sold anymore, where we have to dispose of it, the Office of General Services oversees that surplus property program. So they have series that relate to the administration of that program, where they retain records longer than we would retain within our agency the records of our participation in that program. The fifth item, you can't really tell looking at it who it belongs to, but that is a NYSERDA series. There's a general schedule item for FOIL responses, and most agencies use that, but NYSERDA assessed their administrative needs and realized that they wanted to keep those records for longer. So this is a NYSERDA specific series where they keep the FOIL responses for significantly longer than would be required for the general schedule. Agencies can decide to keep things longer than the general schedule, but they cannot shorten that retention period. That's the minimum. And you can decide to keep records longer than general schedule and not create your own series, but it really does make a lot of sense to create your own series, because not only is it documenting that policy for your staff, but it's also documenting that policy if there's ever a concern about why your agency is keeping certain records for certain periods of time. It's a way to show those outside of your organization that, yes, we have a policy and we're abiding by it. Now that you know what kinds of schedules there are, how do you find the one that applies to specific records? Well, even though you may look at a record type and say that, oh, this is a facilities management record, we all have facilities, it's probably in the general schedule, you're going to want to look at your agency-specific schedule first. Think about that NYSERDA FOIL schedule. Even though that's something in the general schedule, they have specific longer retention requirements. So first make sure that your agency doesn't have something similar for the record type that you're looking at. You can find out by talking to your records management officer, or if they don't have information, contacting the state archives. Your records management officer may also have a copy of an office retention schedule, which I think is a fantastic little cheat sheet, because what it does is if you have a large agency, you may have a long, long list of retention schedules that you abide by, but your particular unit may only have to worry about 5 of them. So an office retention schedule would limit itself only to those records and those record series that interest your unit. So instead of having to go through information overload and go through a list where many things may sound kind of similar, you would be able to limit your request and your review to only those records that you actually hold. So you've got your list of record series. How do you assess it? Well, look at your records. What function do they perform? Who does it support? What processes does it document? What goal is achieved by those records? You may also want to look at how they're filed. Records are grouped together for a reason, and that reason may indicate how those records would be grouped under retention schedules. You can also look at who creates, receives, or uses the records. Some record types spend their entire life within a particular unit. Others, for example, procurement records, may move from place to place. If I put in a request for a special kind of highlighter for some reason, and it's approved, that may go from my unit to the unit that places the orders to the unit that reconciles the expenses. And my copy may not be the official copy. So if I have a copy and it's not in the schedule for my unit, I may want to check whether another unit, like the comptroller's office within my organization, or the fiscal office within my organization, holds the official copy. If their copy is the official copy, and they are retaining it in accordance with the schedule, then I can probably consider my copy to be a disposable convenience copy that can be tossed when no longer needed. Okay, I've decided that there is no agency-specific schedule and that I can look at the general schedule. The items in the general schedule, because they are, as I said before, general, means that the descriptions are not necessarily going to match up to the way that I think of the records. They may put records together that I would not normally associate with one another. But if you read them and you assess them, you can often find what you're looking for. When you're looking at the general schedule, it's not going to say that, oh, this covers not only email records and paper records, but also microfilm. So you're not going to necessarily see that the description exactly matches what you're looking for. But if the topic of the record or the function of the record is described, that's probably the series you need. You're probably not going to see a list of the specific forms, names, or numbers that you use, and you might not see the terminology that you use in your office. But again, if you are looking at the way that the records are used and the way that they are, that they contribute to a process, then you're probably going to find the right series. You're probably not also going to have them listed in the groups within your organization, because we all think of our records differently and we all think of the relationship between records differently. But if you keep an open mind, you're probably going to find something that matches your records. And because things are pretty general, and because they're not organized the way that you normally would, you're going to sometimes have to utilize different ways of searching the general schedule. There's an index at the back, and even though it's not going to have every single series, and even though it may not describe things in exactly the way that you think of them, it's a good place to start. Like, for example, if you're looking for a series related to canceled checks, it might not be under checks. It might be under fiscal. But if you keep an open mind, if you use synonyms, you probably will find something. If it's not in the index, look at the functional headings. The series are organized within the general schedule by different headings. Like, for example, records related to records management are in a heading specific to that. Records related to information technology are going to be in a heading for that. So that's a good place to go, browse, find something that's related to your particular records. If there's nothing in your agency schedule and nothing in the general schedule topic headings that relates to the records, check the general administration section. One thing you're going to want to be aware of, though, is that the general administration section is, as you'd guess, even more general than the general schedule itself. So, for example, the general administration section has a series for plans, but there are all sorts of different plans, and some of them have specific retention requirements. Like if you're looking for your series covering recruitment plans, that's actually going to be in the affirmative action section. Those records do not go under the plan series in the general administration section. But even though this sounds complicated, really all you do is you go through, you read through the various options, you do a bit of brainstorming, and hopefully you'll find what you're looking for. Now, I gave the first 3 steps, but I usually skip straight to step 4. I like using the keyword searches on the electronic version. It's an easy way to find multiple hits for a series that might relate to my records, but the problem is, as I said before, things aren't necessarily described the way that you and I would describe them in our office. So I have to use synonyms, I have to think about other ways the records can be described, and sometimes I just have to browse through a relevant section, just like with any other type of search. And if you do all of these, and you're still not finding something that seems like the exact right fit, please don't be shy about contacting us. We have staff specifically hired to work with state agencies and help you with your records programs. Please make use of us. We love talking about your records, and we're very happy to work with you to try to identify the right series or determine if the reason you couldn't find one is because there isn't a right series right now. Now, as I said before, there are times when you're not going to be able to apply these series. So even though you've gone through, you've figured out what series applies to your records, you figured out how long you need to keep them, maybe there's a litigation hold. Maybe there's an audit coming up or some other review. Or maybe you've just received a FOIL request. Even if the record's responsive to that litigation, audit, or FOIL request were scheduled such they could have been destroyed 6 months ago, once you have that action active, once that request is received, once you've received notification that litigation is anticipated, you cannot dispose of those records until the matter is resolved. And there may be a retention requirement that comes into play once one of those actions occurs. Like if you have litigation, you may have an internal requirement that records related to the litigation must be kept for X number of years after the litigation is completed. So make sure that you are aware of any actions that are going on that may impact those records, and make sure that you make a good faith effort that any records responsive to them are available for review and any required release for the amount of time necessary, both legally and just to show that you're making a good faith effort to maintain transparency requirements set upon state agencies. So we've talked about schedules. We've talked about the fact they're not exactly clear all the time, or that they may not match the records as you think of them. So what do you do when you need help? Well, you contact the state archives. I'm part of the Scheduling and State Agency Services Unit, and our reason for being is to help you with your records management quandaries. We can help you interpret schedules, identify schedules, or draft new ones. We talk about why schedules are the way they are, why a certain retention requirement was set, and we can discuss whether that requirement doesn't meet your needs anymore. We can provide other records management advice about off-site storage, setting policy and procedure, providing training for staff. We are your one-stop shop for assistance in making your program meet your needs. And if you have any questions or you just want to commiserate, please contact us at the email address at the bottom of your screen. So, coming away from this, what are the most important things to remember? If you're looking for the retention schedule that applies to your records, start by looking at your agency-specific schedule, even if it's a record type that everybody is going to create. If you don't have an agency-specific schedule, go on to look at your general schedule. And then if you're still not finding anything that's quite right, contact the state archives. Sometimes things are worded in a weird way. Sometimes the schedule doesn't exist yet, or sometimes it's, a little outdated. So even though it applies to a type of record, it doesn't read that way at first glance. So please do contact us at that email address, which I'll be showing again in the next slide, and we will help you out however we can to find the schedule or create a schedule that meets your needs. Thank you very much for viewing this webinar. Please check out our other retention schedule modules in this series, and if you have any questions about the topics we covered or anything else related to managing your agency's records, please don't hesitate to contact us at recmanagement, recmgmt@nised.gov. Please also visit our website for more free webinars and resources. Have a good day.